So the title for our panel is Watershed Management Authorities, Thinking Outside the Border, okay? So if you were here this morning for one of the plenary speakers, you might have seen that map of the watersheds and how they don't really overlap with our county and city boundaries. So watershed management authorities are a great strategy to address our watershed issues at that appropriate scale and kind of going across all of our boundaries. So I feel like I'm needing to project my voice, so I'm going to try to not speak so loudly. Who has the clicker? All right. Okay, so the way that we're going to run this panel is I'm going to sort of do the introduction, and I do see a lot of familiar faces here in the audience today, but I think there are a lot of folks who may not be as familiar with watershed management authorities. So I want to give everyone a flavor of what a WMA is, what they can and can't do, and the role they've been playing for improving watershed issues in our state. And then we're going to turn it over to our individual panelists. And actually, I just want to say a really quick introduction to them. The panelists that we have here today are Cara Morgan. She's a project coordinator for the East and West Nishnabotna Watershed Management Authorities, working out of the Golden Hills RC&D. John Swanson, he's an outreach coordinator working for the Polk County Soil and Water Conservation District, and he works with a variety of WMAs out of the Polk County area. And then Megan Buckingham, she's the project coordinator with the Northeast Iowa RC&D and works with a couple of watershed management authorities in Northeast Iowa. Okay, so first and foremost, what is a watershed management authority? Just a real quick show of hands. How many of you here today are pretty confident that you can answer that question, what is a watershed management authority? Okay, so pretty good show of hands here. Very simply, a watershed management authority is an intergovernmental cooperative agreement, okay? So it's a Chapter 28 agreement, if you're familiar with that concept. And the entities that are eligible to sign on to this 28D agreement are cities, counties, soil and water conservation districts, and a little bit more recently, we added benefited lake and water quality districts to that list of who can sign on to a watershed management authority. So they were made possible by legislation that was passed back in 2010. That's House File 2459. And that legislation was really a direct response to the 2008 floods. So anybody here today was here in Iowa for that time. I personally was not. But that was a very sort of life-changing event, catastrophic flooding. And our state legislators really realized that we needed to do something. We needed to create a mechanism for our cities and counties to work together to cooperatively address our watershed issues. So that's what kind of brought together the watershed management authorities. So the activities of WMAs are laid out in the Iowa Code. Okay? So Iowa Chapter 466B, if you're a policy nerd and you want to go look that up, it's right there. And the authorizing legislation is really quite broad. It does define what a WMA can and can't do. So they're charged with assessing flood risk and water quality issues and finding solutions to those issues. They monitor federal flood risk and planning activities. And then they also are charged with education. So if you're involved with the WMA, you know that education is a huge part of a WMA's job. So it is very important to note that they're called watershed management authorities. They don't really have a lot of actual authority. Okay, so they can't tax, they can't really regulate or enforce. Really, the authority in this context refers more to the cooperation aspect. Okay, we're not creating more government with WMAs, we're creating more efficient government. So I think that's a really important concept. And then one other thing that's important to note is that WMAs cannot acquire land through eminent domain. That is something that comes up quite a lot during the WMA formation process. So they don't have that authority. And what you'll hear in just a few minutes is that really no two WMAs are alike. They're all unique. They all have their own strategy and approach to addressing their local watershed concerns. So as far as the benefits of watershed management authorities, they are numerous. They work on watershed planning and prioritization. They help to secure grant funds and in some cases local resources as well. The urban-rural alliances that are formed as a result of WMAs are very powerful. You know, when you walk into a WMA meeting, you frequently see farmers sitting down with city and county elected officials and staff. So it's such a great opportunity for cooperation. So just a real quick overview of the history of Watershed Management Authorities. Sorry that that's a little bit tough to read, but in 2012, the first WMAs were formed, and they took advantage of funding that was made available to the state of Iowa from the 2008 disaster declaration funds that were allocated to the state by the federal government. A portion of those were set aside by Iowa to help fund the first 6 watershed management authorities. So over the next several years, more WMAs formed, and DNR issued some planning grants to help keep the WMAs going, help allow them to do some watershed planning. But 2016 was really a game changer year for WMAs. That's when the state received nearly $100 million for the Iowa watershed approach, much of which was dedicated for watershed management authority work. And some of the folks who are here today are part of that project. So now fast forward to 2018, we have 23 WMAs across the state. We have a new statewide organization that has formed, the WMAs of Iowa, and they're doing a great job of working together, trying to raise more awareness of WMAs at the state level. So here's a map of where we have WMAs today. So 36% of the land area is now covered by a WMA across the state. Okay, so over a third of the state is covered by WMAs, and many counties are covered by WMAs as well. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. And I'm going to have Cara Morgan start things off, and I have a bio that I want to read for Cara. Okay, so Cara Morgan first attended college at Peru State College, majoring in wildlife ecology and biology. Cara found herself in retail from 1997 until 2005, where she managed both single and multi-unit stores for mainly farm store companies in Nebraska, Minnesota, and Iowa. Later, Cara returned to Peru State, where she received a BS in Management and Marketing. In 2008, Cara was elected county supervisor in Fremont County, where she was afforded the opportunity to be a part of many boards and organizations, such as chair of the Iowa State Association of County Supervisors. When in 2011, nearly 1/3 of her county was underwater due to the flooding of the Missouri River, Cara discovered her passion for making a difference within watersheds. Since then, Cara has worked with watersheds. She went to work for Hills RC&D in February of 2017 and is the lead project coordinator for both the East and West Nishnabotna River watersheds. Cara is married to her husband, Brandon. They have 3 children, Maverick, Zandria, and Saitara. And Cara's in a really unique situation because for her project, the East and West Nishnabotna, there are 2 WMAs that are cooperating and sharing resources. So look forward to hearing from you about that.
Thank you, Mary Beth. As she said, what I was asked to talk about today is being the coordinator of 2 very separate watersheds and working through the unique opportunity of having those watershed meetings jointly. These are the 2 watersheds that I'm currently working in, and as you can see, there's a divide right here. There are 2 Huckgate watersheds. They are the East and West Nishnabotna. We call them sister watersheds, is what we do down in our corner of the woods. But the East Nishnabotna is about 696,000 acres. The West Nishnabotna is approximately 489,000 acres, for a total of 1,185,000,000 acres. We have 3, on the East watershed, we have 7 Soil and Water Conservation District members. We have 8 county members and 6 city members, for a total of 21 total members. On the West Nishnabotna, we have 8 soil and water conservation districts, 8 counties, and 8 cities, for a total of 24 members. So, as you can see, that makes for a very large meeting. And we do run those meetings jointly. However, I do have some tricks to running the meetings jointly. If you know about 2080 agreements, obviously they are open meeting, open records. They have to be posted. We have to go according to proper Robert's Rules of Order. So there are a lot of logistics that I have the opportunity to make sure we are sticking to. This is an example of one of our agendas, actually the agenda of our upcoming meeting. We take action on everything separately. The motions are made by the east and voted on by the east. Motions are made by the west and voted on by the west. If you look back at the map, you can see that even though they are two sister watersheds, for example here, I have a county that has both watersheds. I have a county that has both watersheds. I have a county here that has both watersheds. So for logistics, soil water conservation district members, supervisors, it makes it a lot easier for them to come to one meeting rather than two. Saves their days, saves my days, we all win. But again, we do make all of our actions separately. And I'm going to tell you about a few of my tricks. First of all, my board members for each side have a sign-in sheet. This is how I make sure that I do have my quorum for every one of my meetings. They get a little confused sometimes, and they'll only sign one. But I do make sure that I send it back around and they sign the second one. I've got 10 cards for each of them, and they're color-coded. I have red, blue, and purple. Red's my east, blue's my west, and purple's the both. So when I make motions, when I have votes, they don't realize all this. They also have folders that I put together for them that have the list of their members, all of their contact lists, their bylaws. But guess what? They're color-coded. If one of them's walking around or something like that and they have their folder, I know exactly which watershed they are from or if they represent both. So being the coordinator and having to herd those cats, there are ways that we can make sure that we are following the procedures and making sure that we are making the motions and running the meeting properly and separately, yet jointly. Quorum is one of the things that I know that watershed management coordinators always struggle with. My members know that they're going to receive an email 1 month in advance with a save the date. The next thing they will receive is another email with the agenda about 2 weeks in advance. And then 1 week in advance, they receive another notice that they need to let me know whether or not they're going to be there. I have every single one of my meetings on the third Wednesday of the quarterly month. They all know it. It's going to be at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it's going to be in Oakland. It'll be from 9 to noon. Don't deviate unless we have one of these meetings like this week, which we moved it to next week. But they know that if they don't let me know that 1 week in advance, they're going to receive a phone call on Monday morning before that Wednesday to find out if they're going to be there or not. The other thing that I try to do, rather than just having a meeting and doing the official business and the official actions that need to be done, I make sure we have 2 speakers. Our engineering firm, JEO, will be our speaker this month. And I try to mix it up. I have a speaker from the Corps, I'll have a speaker from USGS, I'll have a speaker from NRCS. I try to mix it up so that they have a little bit of a speaker, but I always get them out of there by noon. And we've never yet, with 43 members, we have not yet, knock on wood, missed a quorum. And sometimes that's extremely difficult with as many members as we have. So there are things that you can do to make your meeting run smoother and to make it more interesting so that you do have your quorums and you do have them come. You make it easier for your public officials that are on these boards. Don't make them come to 2 or 3 meetings. Run the 2 meetings jointly, even if it's a little more work for me. But let them have their day, the rest of the day next time, rather than running 2 separate meetings. So, if you have any questions, you can easily get a hold of me. And this, if anybody knows my east and west Nishnabotna, this is flooding in 1952. reading the articles about this is really interesting. I use that as my end note every time. So, any questions? Okay.
Everyone got a chance. So save your questions. If everyone goes at this rate, goodness gracious. Okay, next up.
Will run itself.
Okay, next up we have Megan Buckingham, and she's that Watershed Outreach Coordinator at Northeast Iowa RC&D. So Megan works with a team of RC&D staff and partners in the Upper Iowa and Upper Watershed watershed to actively engage landowners, community leaders, and watershed neighbors in planning for resilience. Before joining RC&D, she organized farmers and rural residents to work together to advance policies that support sustainable agriculture and family farms. She has a BA from Gustavus Adolphus College and lives in the Upper Iowa River watershed in Decorah, Iowa. So please join me in welcoming Cara.
All right, so it's almost 4 o'clock, and I thought you all might be tired of reading words on a screen. So while I talk to you, get to look at pictures that illustrate what I'm going to talk to you about. So as Mary Beth mentioned, my name is Megan Buckingham. I work with Northeast Iowa Resource Conservation and Development. We're out of Postville, Iowa. And we're currently working with the Upper Iowa and Upper Wapsie River watersheds to write their long-term resilience plans. So Mary Beth mentioned the Iowa Watershed Approach, this big grant that the state of Iowa got to work on watershed projects. I think a lot of folks are familiar with the pot of that money that's going into projects that are happening right now, which is great. Water project coordinators are working on the ground to put projects in place in the next 5 years. We also have funding to create these long-term plans, and that's our role. So we're working with all the entities, all the partners in the Watershed Management Authorities to try to plan to reduce flooding out into the future. And so when we think about planning, you know, we have great GIS specialists and technicians, and they're increasingly good tools that help us model what kinds of strategies will actually reduce flow, reduce flooding. That's wonderful. But if we want to plan to do that, we can't just look at a map and say, well, it'd be really nice if we put a wetland there or a bioswale there. We should have to figure out what are people going to do on the ground. And so I'm going to talk to you specifically about the community side of that, working with folks to hear and also to try to help develop new ideas about what we could actually do, what we'd be willing to implement in our communities, on our properties, that's going to reduce flooding and improve water quality. So, these are moving kind of fast, but that's okay. So, they'll just keep going. So Northeast Iowa RC&D has worked with watersheds for the last couple of decades. But as Mary Beth talked about, watershed management authorities are relatively new. And really, I think working especially in communities, in cities, and in our case, in lots of pretty small towns, to try to take a watershed-minded approach is really pretty new. So when RC&D was working in the Turkey River watershed a couple of years ago and writing a plan for that watershed, we were talking to the community, the city members of that WMA, and when we wanted to hear, so what would you really do in your community? We asked them some questions, we gave them a form, we said, would you put in wetlands? Check. Would you put in bioswales? Check. Would you, would you put in some permeable pavers? And the WMA representatives who are often, volunteer mayors or the city clerk who's part-time and maybe the lone city employee, said, sure, we'll do a bioswale. I have no idea what permeable pavers are, but that sounds fun. And they checked them off and we put them in the plan. That's great. That's better than not asking at all. But when we started to work with the Upper Iowa and Upper Wapsie, we said, and I should also say, in addition to that, there are some really good relationships with those city entities, and some really good projects actually have gone on the ground since then. That's not all we did, but in working with the Upper Iowa and Upper Wapsie, the team of folks who worked on the Turkey said, let's take a deeper approach to this. And so, particularly in the Upper Wapsie River watershed, these are two really different watersheds. The Upper Wapsie River watershed is really long. It runs from the Minnesota border all the way down to, I think, Jones County. There are 30 communities, incorporated communities, in that really long and narrow watershed. A lot of those are really small communities. 15 of those are members of the WMA. In the Upper Iowa River watershed, there's only one active community member of that WMA, and that's the city of Decorah. There's one other community that doesn't come to any of the WMA meetings and isn't really engaged. So in working with the Wapsie, we said, well, we want to get communities together. We need to get the folks who can actually decide, make the decision to do watershed projects, make the decision to do urban stormwater management projects. And then we also need some of the folks who are actually going to go do those things. So we need some that we asked the communities that were active in the Upper Wapsie to work with us to form community teams. And we asked them to have both those folks who can make decisions and those folks who are going to kind of do the work on their teams. And we wanted them to keep them pretty small. Again, if you are the city of Tripola, you don't need a community team of 20 people. You might want to have your mayor and a city councilor and the city staff person, or potentially the firm your city works with to do projects in town, somebody from there. And so a number of communities in the Upper Wapsie have worked really well with us and have done that. And so we brought them together a couple of times to just talk through some of the options, some of the kinds of green stormwater management practices that are potentially available to them. But, you know, that has limited appeal sitting and watching a slideshow, and it also, it's not necessarily great at stimulating the imagination. So the folks that were willing to put in that time and were interested, we then have been going out, a team of us from RC&D have been going out and actually going to communities and walking around town with those community teams. So, and that's been really successful. You know, we'll talk to folks in, actually I think the greatest example is not in the Upper Iowa or Upper Wapsie, but it's in the Turkey in Postville, where our office is. A couple years ago, Postville had an opportunity to get some funding to do green stormwater projects. And they said, I don't know if we really have anything we want to do. And then a couple folks from our office were like, no, all right. They got them to walk around town. And in that walk, hundreds of ideas, way more ideas that we could actually actualize with the potentially available funding came out. There were so many opportunities. And so that, as you'll notice in these pictures, there are a lot of pictures of, not this one as I turn and look at it, but a lot of pictures of people actually moving around and interacting. And we really have prioritized that in these community teams and in all of our engagement strategies. Which leads me to just one other thing I want to mention. So there's a mix of pictures here. These are of community teams working with maps. We got them together at one of the earlier gatherings with maps to look at where they have problem areas and to talk through where they see opportunities to put things on the ground, and also to try to call up what other things they might have going on in town. So we want it to be something that's going to be of value to them. So if you're talking to the community of Riceville that feels like, gosh, we don't have that many stormwater management problems. So let's think about what else you need to do in Riceville right now. Are you thinking about building a new park? Are you thinking about doing something with your golf course? are there other projects that we can build green stormwater infrastructure into, or that this would be a really nice complement for? Some of the pictures here, and that one that just went by is a good example, are actually of some public meetings that we did. And I included those, even though we're talking specifically about communities, because the WMA approach really does, I think is really important in watersheds like the ones we work in the Upper Iowa and Upper Wapsie. This whole outreach approach, which for us has included things like public meetings that were open to landowners and members of the community, has really actually helped shape some of what community teams do. So in Decorah, at the public meeting we had in Decorah, we had a local landscaper come who's kind of excited about green stormwater projects. We're a pretty small town. There's been a little bit of uptake, but he's done one on his property. He doesn't have a lot of other people asking for them yet, but he's really excited about them. He got to talk to a couple of city councilors who were there about the possibility of a city cost share to help encourage folks to do those kinds of projects. Now that's something that maybe would have percolated over time, but again, it was helpful to have that opportunity, and it really furthered that community team's thinking about that particular kind of project. Riceville is actually a great example of a community that didn't come, their representative didn't drive all the way down to Independence for the WMA meetings. So when we had a public meeting in Riceville, it actually led to a new partnership there because they had some of their city councilors and city leaders came to that meeting and got excited about some of what they could do in town. So that launched a new community team. So Mary Beth also wanted me to I'm going to try to be quick here and just mention, I think we've gotten a lot out of this. It's this new approach that has been really valuable. There are some limitations. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to coordinate folks, especially when you're working with really small towns and folks who are volunteers. That works for us while we're planning with the Upper Iowa and Upper Wapsie, but that looks a little bit different if you're just a project coordinator who's also trying to get projects on the ground, right? So that's something to consider. We also are in a uniquely good position to work with communities on these kinds of projects. Our organization's mission is really broad. We do local economic development work and as well as resource conservation work, and so communities know that we can continue to be a resource for them in terms of finding funding for some of these projects that might not work as well for some other entities. And then lastly, I just really want to emphasize the importance of adapting it to the watershed and to the communities. So as I mentioned, the Upper Wapsie looks really different for us. We're working with, in that case, mostly really small towns, but some larger ones, versus in the Upper Iowa, we're really just working with the city of Decorah, where it so happens actually a whole bunch of our staff live. And so, that community team actually started way too big, and we had to kind of, it took a couple meetings to get that narrowed down to a group of people that could effectively work together and make some decisions. So, with that, I think I'll let John take the mic.
For John here. So John has been a watershed coordinator with Polk Soil and Water Conservation District for the past 6 years. He has worked on various watershed projects in both ag and urban areas, and most recently he's been coordinating implementation efforts for 3 watershed management authorities in central Iowa. So please welcome John.
Presentation is going to be a little bit different, and that's the fact that I'm going to be talking about implementation. So we have watershed management authorities that are ready to move forward with implementation. And not only doing so, but doing so with the idea that it needs to be locally led first. And we really all started with the idea that it's awesome to get state and federal funding, but in our case, we talked a little bit about the HUD funding. Unfortunately, our watersheds in the Des Moines Metro didn't get any of that funding. So we're looking at how can we do this, do it long-term, and do it in a manner that we can really put our skin in the game. And also touching on every WMA is different. You've heard a lot about some larger WMAs, very important. Here in the Des Moines Metro, they want to look specifically at HUC 12 watersheds and one HUC 10 watershed. They're looking specifically at which watersheds have had the most impacts on the Des Moines Metro and which ones did they want to focus on that they felt they could get real improvements. And even within these 3 watersheds around the Des Moines Metro, they're all incredibly different. Walnut Creek in the western suburbs, one of the fastest developing watersheds in the state. Walnut Creek, 400 acres per year is developing from agriculture to urban. Huge swaths of land, houses, businesses are being built. 4 Mile Creek watershed, watershed I actually grew up in, long history of Des Moines saying, hey, our flooding issues, it's because of development upstream. And you can be saying, well, some of our issues is because of the farmers upstream. These are some of the conversations that really spurred the beginning of watershed management authorities in the Des Moines Metro. And then you have Mud Camp and Spring Creek watersheds on the east side. 90% agriculture, but that 10% urban is growing. And the idea, as things change, we need to be properly planning and knowing the future of these creeks and how can ag and urban coexist. And how can these conversations coexist to not only point the finger, but say, how can we work together, we're all part of the watershed. And so I said, like I mentioned, these watersheds all went through the planning process similar to other WMAs in the state. They got DNR funding, they all hired an engineering firm, they developed plans. That plans incorporated public input, watershed assessment, and at the end of the day, each of these 3 watersheds had a book. And this book says, to address flooding, to address water quality, these are the goals you need to set, and these are the actions you need to take. So, sitting in 2015, all these plans were completed, and they're all in the same step of, okay, how do we move forward? There weren't really any options at the time, and they said, we want to do this locally. So kind of thinking collaboratively, they said, listen, what if we all work together to hire someone to implement these plans, to really be out there, boots on the ground, doing the work. And they developed a watershed funding model that really looked at 2 different funding mechanisms. One, there's 25 members. We all have different areas in the watershed, and we all have different populations. Cities that have a higher population, they generally have more funding. So we did a calculation based upon a weighted average of your area within the watershed and your population of your city, and developed a funding mechanism to hire a coordinator. And everyone agreed that this was the mechanism they wanted to do because A, everyone has an equal input into it, and B, it's long-term. There's the opportunity that we could, if this goes well, we could keep doing this long-term. It's not going to stop in 3 years. It's not going to stop in 5 years. These are long-term issues. These plans are developed saying 20 years to do all this work. This is step 1 in the local jurisdiction's eyes. And that's really where my employer, Polk SWCD Conservation District, really came into play. Because what we've been doing over the last couple of decades was doing just this. It's happened time and time again where a plan is completed, and they say whether it's a lake or whether it's a stream or a river, we need someone to implement this plan. We need someone to go out there in the ag areas and the urban areas, in its simplest form, build things. These plans, they say, to fix this issue, you have to put practices on the ground. And that's really what we've been doing for quite a few years in the Des Moines metro area. But we understood that they were all unique, and that they all wanted a coordinator to work across the 3. A team of us work across all 3 of these watersheds, and they're all unique. And when we said, okay, if you'd like us to do this, we really see our role breaking into these couple different things. Education outreach. We were very clear that this is the main focus of early on. Again, just like you can take a project to a farmer and say, hey, we should build a wetland right here. If you simply do that, it doesn't work. You can go to a city and say, hey, we should build a lake right here. That doesn't work. Until those landowners, whether urban or ag, until they understand why that needs to happen, until they understand that it's going to work for them, it all comes through education outreach. Once you have those willing landowners, then you can start installing practices. And unfortunately, again, if I say a landowner, whether ag or urban, says, okay, let's build this wetland. I say, all right, that's going to cost $100,000. They're going to say, oh, that's not going to work. So funding acquisition. We're all understood that we're going to have to bring in funding to do these things. And at the end of the day, we needed to monitor for success. We did not want to implement money onto the ground, whether it's in the plan or not. We wanted to find a way to monitor those. And then finally, something unique to the Des Moines Metro is some ordinance work. We understood that development is quickly happening, and in the current state, development, we know with the current existing ordinances, when you build 400 acres of houses, 400 acres of water is now coming at a rate much faster, and there are ordinances, recommendations that have been done in the state of Iowa that say we can build and we can do it in a manner where it's not going to increase flows and decrease water quality. But we're very clear that doing this is going to take everyone. It's going to take people that are coming to meetings. They're not going to be able to just come to meetings anymore. You're going to have to come to meetings, and you're going to be leaving those meetings with the expectation that you're going to be doing things. In our role, in some cases, we may take the lead. We may be the person out there managing all facets of the project. But in other ways, we're going to be collaborative. We're working together. In other cases, we're being facilitated. We want members of our WMAs, if they have an interest in something, we want them to take the lead, and we will simply fill the needs that they have, and we are more than happy to let them lead. And really, this can be broken down. We did this for each of our WMAs. We wanted to give a very clear picture of how we saw this happen. If we're going to take this role on, how we're going to work together. And in some cases, you can see, in some cases, we don't foresee ourselves being the lead agency. In other cases, we see as a WMA partner or a WMA member being leader. But again, the clear expectation that to lead implementation, you don't hire a coordinator and just say, okay, go do all this work. It's going to be, in our eyes, something more than that. It's going to be, again, partnerships, collaboration. And again, so we hired a coordinator, but we also understood that we could do more. And this is kind of the first step in the process. We locally led first, so we brought the city's money together. And we found time and time again that you can be rewarded by doing so. And in this case, we're rewarded with additional staff funds. We pulled together a water quality initiative. We brought in another staff member. But it started because locally led first. We showed that we were putting skin in the game to do what needed done. And we were able to find funding from IDALS, Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance, as well as some BMP funding. So that was a first early win for our WMA that was leveraged by local inputs. So again, we were hired, and at the end of the day, we're very clear. We're here to take this plan and do things with it. We want, at the end of the day, we're going to be graded on how much are we putting on the ground, how much are we really building. Taking, again, everyone's been sitting around a table for a long time. There have been years of meetings. And how do we take those meetings and put excavators on the ground where they need to be on the ground? And within a year, this started happening. But again, we needed to find some money and build some stuff. That was our message from day one. In its simplest form, we're ready. We know what we're going to do. And we came to and say, all right, we're going to find some money and build some stuff. But to get started, it took a little bit more than that. And it really came down to, there's some coordinators and there's people that have spent a lot of time in the watershed, and then I get a lot of questions about how do you work with cities? How do you work with all these cities? It's the same conversation. As a WMA member and as a coordinator, why is that WMA member at the table? Why are they here? What do they want out of the watershed? What are their goals? And how does that relate to the watershed goals? How do these things play back and forth? Who's your audience? Who's the background? Those of you that work with agriculture producers, farmers, going out on the land, finding out what is their story. How do you connect their story with the needs of the watershed? We view the WMA as the exact same process. Why are they at the table? How can we connect those local needs with the larger watershed needs and bring the two together? And in many cases, it varied greatly. One city's water quality was, they had a drinking water issue that they cared about. Another city, they've had 100 years of flooding. That was their issue. Another city, they love greenways. They wanted bike trails. They wanted ponds for people to fish in. And another city, they have pipes that were being washed under that were being degraded. They needed to fix their pipes. But in all those, they can always tie back to the watershed improvements. And we really took that and we started seeing some early successes. Bringing in outside funding sources. The Nature Conservancy, you saw a little award there that they got at the lunch. We came out and met them and said, hey, we heard a lot of work about the great work you guys have been doing in Northern Iowa. Have you ever considered working in the Des Moines Metro? And they're like, well, really? What they do is private fundraising, a lot of it. And they said, well, we've really never worked in the Des Moines Metro. Let's partner. End of the year, We had 6 oxbows got restored. Moving into next year, we have another 11 planned for this year. Just one project, but again, it was about, we had the people, we found willing landowners. Here again, we'd never done an oxbow in the metro. No one had ever seen one. I'd never seen one until I was on a tour with the Soviet Association. And we talked to some farmers, and they were very hesitant because they had no idea, other than a picture to show them. But we had some great relationships with some city parks. And we said, Clyde, Urbandale, what do you guys think about us doing this oxbow wetland? And they're like, well, we've never done a wetland before. But at the end of the day, they said, you know what, we're invested, we want to do this, let's do it. 6 of them got built, and now we're leveraging that. We're doing another 11 next year. Agricultural producers are a big part of it. This was something that, as an SWCD, we played a big role in because cities, face it, cities, urban areas, they're different than agricultural areas. Most cities, they've never worked with a farmer before. They really never had those interactions. But those interactions need to happen in our watersheds. In general, our watersheds are roughly half ag, half urban. To address our watershed concerns, we need to address both. So field days, site visits. At the end of the day, what did that turn into? 5 saturated buffers in the first year, 2 bioreactors, a couple thousand acres in cover crops. But it all started because the cities, the WMA members, the early adopters, they were all part of that planning process. And we went out and we held field days, we shared that messaging, we found the money, put some projects on the ground. Talk about water monitoring. We were lucky enough to have a county conservation board that was very interested in water monitoring. And they said, we're going to develop a watershed monitoring network where every one of our staff's going to go out every 2 weeks, all year long, and we're going to manage these 32 sites. And we said, that's great, but we can do better. And the WMA provided that avenue to do it better. We said, what about all these cities? You guys have been here for this table. Can we help them out? And we said, and they responded in a great way. They said, yes. And city staffs went through the training. City staffs dedicated every 2 weeks. They go out, and those 32 sites, when we joined them with the WMA, it turned into 67 sites. At the end of the day, a lot can happen through WMAs. That's kind of the final thing I want to bring is you can do a lot of stuff. These WMAs, if they work together, we put $5.3 million worth of conservation on the ground collaboratively around the world in our 3 watersheds. Everything from grass waterways to saturated buffers to urban demonstration, residential projects to stream stabilization. But it all came from over 20 different funding sources. And when we were hired day one, they said, Polk SWCD, here's your watersheds, here's no funding. But what we did have is we had partnerships, we had these plans, and we had people that were willing to put in the local dollars first. And I can tell you, every one of these projects, they had either a landowner contribution or a city contribution. Some of them we had landowners, we had cities. Clive's a great example. We had our grant that didn't get fully funded, and Clive said, hey, you've done the work, you've laid these out, you've designed them. We're just going to do them on our own dollar. We're going to use our public works staff, we're going to build them because we see the benefit in it. And they said, hey, we want Urbandale to do it. We want Urbandale to have the money because they're upstream of us, and we think upstream should get funded first. But what you don't hear about, you see $5.3 million, you see, oh, that's awesome. But you don't hear about the failures. These are like any watershed project. We ran into all these things with almost every one of those projects. Unwilling landowners, missed opportunities because of timing, disgruntled partners. These things all happen, but it's about understanding your partners and understanding that they're disgruntled and that you have a coordinator that's going to go and alleviate some of those problems. Excessive project budgets. We run this daily. We have urban projects. The bids are ridiculous. How can we bring in ag contractors to the urban areas? And we've been doing that, and you get projects that come in at half the cost. We have these grandiose ideas. We had a couple of wetlands. We're going to build a wetland to treat the whole city of Bondurant. Comes in, can't get it to meet design requirements, or comes in a little too expensive. These things happen, but the key is here. They're just barriers that eventually they're going to work themselves out, or you learn from them. And I can tell you, the one that has bothered us the least is lack of funding. Now, why is that? That's because if you go through the process and you find a good project, what we do is, if we have no funding, we still go through that whole process until you have a project that you can say as close as possible is shovel ready. And by simply having shovel ready projects in your pocket, I can't tell you how many opportunities have come up and said, hey, we have some funding, and then you say, well, we have shovel ready projects. It's a good project. It meets our water quality management plan. And it tends to work out. But the key is finding good projects, finding the local landowners. So final thoughts. Understanding the needs. Why are these people at the table? Why are they a part of the WMA? and how do their needs couple with the needs of the entire watershed. Local funding, I can tell you, if you have people that are willing to put their skin in the game, it makes your grants that much better. If you have people that are willing to put their skin in the game, it makes the messaging better. It makes them carry the projects better. If you're just talking someone into doing it and they don't have to pay for anything, if anything ever goes wrong, you're going to hear about it. But if they're a part of the process, if they understand the needs, it's going to go way better. And again, touching on project fundraising, I would urge everyone, just simply have those good projects on the list and have that list ready and have every type of project from a rain garden with a homeowner to a stormwater wetland to a terrace, and simply having those projects ready when those grants come up, it speaks volumes. And finally, we've had the opportunity now to connect downstream urban resources with upstream agricultural practices. With these ongoing WMA relationships have grown to where we have several cities like the city of Des Moines that says, hey, in Fulmar Creek, we want to invest our city utility funds upstream because we see the benefits of working upstream. But that wouldn't have happened when I was growing up, and Des Moines was saying, all of our problems are their fault. We're not going to be a part of that. Things can change, but it's all about the conversation. That's what I got. We got a few minutes for
Great, thank you guys. That was fantastic. I think a big takeaway for me in listening to you guys is just the power of having dedicated staff working on the ground to help meet with your members, understand their concerns, and make things happen. And I think that's probably the goal of a lot of the watershed management authorities I've spoken with, is having that dedicated staff on the ground. So with that, if there are any questions for our panelists, we do have some time for a couple of questions. Don't be shy.
Are you finding as projects, this isn't specifically for anyone, but as your project lists are expanding, that your staffing is becoming more stretched? Maybe it's for John, we work with John and that's for your projects. When I see your watershed boundaries, it's like, wow, that's a lot of area. Like for John, he has 3 of them. You find your staffing, like, how can I do all of these projects?
That's something we had some serious growing pains, especially with our staff. We came from a lot of times a background of a small watershed, and we did the whole process from survey, design, construction oversight, fundraising. And what we've really, the success we found is all about those relationships you built with the cities or with the farm. With farmers are generally still leading that whole process, and oftentimes we've built good relationships with the cities, and when they get, if they have that knowledge, you get. Maybe it's the fundraising portion that they need. Maybe it's just the design portion, but in all ways, we're trying to pass it off at a certain time. And the more we can pass those projects off, the more we can expand on our implementation needs. But it's all about creating people that have enough knowledge that they can still properly manage it. The urban conservation staff's been great in that they manage a lot of the funding we come in. So if we have a technical resource that's available, in that case, oftentimes we'll write the grants, we'll pass it off to them. But it's about passing it off, moving on to the next project. Yeah, so a lot of that comes back to who the city is, and oftentimes, if it's a city that has maybe never done very much water quality before, and you get to the point where they're what you call a willing landowner, a lot of time it's not burdening them with that process, and it's simply getting as far as you can without, if you don't have a funding mechanism to really push it forward, it's going to kind of sit there until there's something to really reinvigorate them. But if we have some funding in mind, oftentimes that can be enough interest to get them pushed to the end. But it's really all about understanding that partner. And then once you even bring in the funding source, or even sometimes design can take a year, but it's all about setting those realistic goals and having conversations up front.
And I'll just add, for us working with primarily smaller towns, there often isn't local funding available at all. And so it really does come down to, is there something that we can fund pretty soon? I think that there we work a lot with these towns, so it helps that we can continue to be in relationship with them. But the ones that the ones that stay really engaged are the ones that have some opportunities in the relative near term.
And I would maybe just end with it is a balancing act. If you do everything for someone, they're going to let you do everything. That's something we constantly battle with. How do you keep them having tasks that they have to do and not just let you do everything? You have to be that's something that would surprise me that we had to be very conscious of.
Great. Well, with that, I want to thank the panelists one more time.